My wife asked if she could dance with another man at the party, and I said, dance with him and stay single because I don't want you anymore. I am sorry, but that's not what I meant to say. I said those words without realizing it, and I was surprised at how cold I sounded. I had a feeling in my heart. It was in a room. It was a room full of smiling faces and vibrant music, and those words cut through the air like a sharp blade. There was a time, I remember, when I completely trusted the woman next to me, and it felt like we were in some kind of union. It was an unshakable trust. But then, as night fell, the mask came off, and I saw the truth of a betrayal buried deep in the past, but still casting a long shadow over the present. She approached, I smiled, almost innocently, and asked permission to dance with another man. My blood ran cold. My blood ran cold, and a flood of memories began to rush through my mind. It was an appearance. It was an innocent enough request, but there was more to it than met the eye. There was a secret story buried deep in a past she had never shared with me. It was as if her past, her secret story, was right there in front of me, even though she didn't say a word. I could see it in his eyes, in the tension on his face. At that moment, I felt many things: jealousy, anger, betrayal. I wasn't the calm man she knew.
This is our Life channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please join us to stay updated with more real stories happening around you.
Or the loving husband I had always been. The trust that had once made our relationship so strong was shattered into 1,000 pieces, and I knew there would be no turning back. My eyes met hers, searching for a truth I didn't want to believe, but already knew was there. It was there, hidden between our smiles and the things we didn't say. But there was nothing left to say. The atmosphere felt like the air around us was filled with a palpable tension. For a moment, everyone was looking at us, but it felt like we were the only two people in the room. I could feel it. The dance wasn't just a dance. It was like the physical embodiment of something she had been holding back. And then, I said the words that would change everything. Dance with him and stay single because I don't want you anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. It was so intense, it was almost deafening. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't find the words. She didn't have to say anything. I could still hear everything else. I already knew it was enough, or maybe I knew more. Maybe I knew more than I was supposed to. The weight of those words was crushing, but there was still something I didn't know, something hidden beneath the surface. Maybe it was a betrayal, a secret she had kept so carefully, and somehow it connected this night to her distant past, what she was hiding, and what did that mean? I am still trying to figure out what it all means. But what I really want to know now is how far this betrayal goes, and what it hides behind this simple request to dance. She doesn't know. But I am about to find out. The room was beautifully decorated, every detail designed to convey elegance and refinement. It was so sophisticated. The soft light from the crystal chandeliers and the music playing in the background created a festive atmosphere. It was a night to remember. Many had been looking forward to it, an annual event where people in the small, cozy Denver neighborhood of Cherry Creek gathered to dance, laugh, and for a brief moment forget their everyday worries. Among the couples, Richard stood out. He had a strong and confident presence, and his blue eyes showed a confidence that many admired. And his wife Jessica, a woman of delicate beauty and a charming smile. So it seemed. They were the picture of perfection, the kind of couple everyone dreams of being forever. Richard had built his life. Richard had worked hard and shown great perseverance. The proud owner of a small construction company, Richard had faced many challenges over the years, but he always found strength in Jessica. She had this incredible ability to light up any room she was in. She had a way of making everyone feel welcome. Her kindness and charisma made her impossible to ignore. She was a dear friend and neighbor to so many. They were the ideal couple, the perfect example of a strong and happy marriage. One marriage, but like many. But as we all know, appearances can be deceiving. Over the past few months, Richard had noticed a subtle change in Jessica. She seemed a little distant, as if she was always that way. It was like she was thinking about something else, like she was somewhere else in her mind. They were talking, but it felt like she was going through the motions. What had once flowed naturally now seemed forced, and moments of intimacy became rare. Richard tried his best. He told himself it was just fatigue or the stress of everyday life. Of everyday life. But there was something. There was a palpable tension in the air, and Richard couldn't ignore it. The once peaceful atmosphere had been disturbed. His nights were no longer peaceful. He tossed and turned in bed, afraid that something was wrong. Okay, Jessica. On the other hand, he was living in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She thought she loved Richard, but there was something inside of her. She felt like something inside her had changed, a part of her. She thought she had left her heart behind a long time ago, but it seemed to still be beating. It was beating hard again. In the past few months, she had begun to see old friends again, and it had brought back memories of simpler times before marriage, before the responsibilities of adult life. Among these friends, there was one in particular who stirred feelings she thought she had left behind. Among these friends, there was one in particular who stirred feelings she thought she had left behind. Michael, her first love. Michael was Richard's opposite in almost every way. While Richard was stable and predictable, Michael was impulsive and adventurous. When they met by chance, sparks flew. After not seeing each other for more than 10 years, they met by chance at a local coffee shop, and Jessica felt an instant spark. It was like a fire had been rekindled. He was a different person now. He wasn't the carefree young man she once knew, but there was still a sparkle in his eyes that drew her in. They talked like old times. They were like old friends, sharing laughter and memories. Soon a beautiful friendship was born. Richard had no idea that she was connecting with him in a new way. Jessica was busy with her own interests, maybe a little bored with her routine. He had never imagined that this would be the case. He'd never thought that the things that had happened in Jessica's past could come between them now and threaten everything they'd built together. He decided to stay. He was so busy with his work, and he was sure that they could overcome any problem that came their way, just like they always had before. But that night, as they prepared for the dance, Jessica felt particularly restless. She spent more time than usual in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress, touching up her lipstick, checking herself. She was nervous. Richard, on the other hand, was kind enough to compliment her appearance, saying she looked beautiful as always. But the lack of enthusiasm in his voice didn't go unnoticed by Jessica. She felt it deep inside. She felt that something was breaking between them, something that might be impossible to repair. They arrived. They had a great time together, but it felt like there was an invisible barrier between them. Barrier. Richard greeted them warmly. His friends and colleagues tried to pretend that everything was normal, but Jessica seemed lost in her own thoughts. She saw Michael across the room, chatting with a group of people. He saw her, and for a brief moment, they met. It was a silent moment, but it was full of emotion. She felt a chill run down her spine, a mixture of excitement and guilt that made her dizzy. The music began to play louder, and couples began to fill the dance floor. Richard noticed Jessica, felt a little uncomfortable, but she decided to let it go. He decided to look past it. He didn't want to, but he couldn't help himself. He didn't want to make a scene, especially on a night like this one. He just wanted to enjoy the moment. He just wanted a quiet night, maybe to have some fun, and relieve the tension he felt. But Jessica had other ideas. As Michael moved around the room, a dangerous idea began to take shape in his mind. She knew it. She shouldn't, because it would be a disastrous mistake. But the desire and the nostalgia was just too strong to resist. Finally, she turned to Richard and asked in a quiet voice, "Can I dance with him?" Surprised, Richard looked at her, not immediately understanding whom she was asking, almost automatically. She didn't need to, she didn't have to answer. Richard followed her gaze to Michael, who was standing on the other side of the room, discreetly watching them. Richard felt a surge of anger and betrayal, as if it was almost too much to bear at him. This was the night he feared the most, the night when all his suspicions would be confirmed. He could have screamed, he could have made a scene, but instead he reacted with calm composure. Maybe it was a bit cruel, but he felt he had to stay calm. Dance with him and stay single because I don't want you anymore. And then came the answer. It was a bit of a shock. It was a hard pill for Jessica to swallow. She hadn't expected it, especially this. She was frozen for a moment, not sure how to react. It felt as if time stood still and the world around her stopped. All sounds around her disappeared, leaving only the soft echo of Richard's voice, words, and so on. With a simple invitation to dance, their lives began to unfold in ways neither could have predicted. This night was just beginning, but the events that would follow would change their lives forever. After Richard left, she felt a little overwhelmed, like she was losing her footing. She had never experienced the coldness in her husband's voice. She had never felt this way before. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show anger and exaggerated gestures, but the icy and definitive tone with which he spoke those words pierced her like a knife. The elegant ballroom, with its twinkling lights and soft music, felt like a nightmare. Her decisions began to feel unbearably heavy. She stood still, thinking about what had just happened, while Richard walked toward the bar as if he had just completed a simple transaction. Jessica didn't know what to do. She had a strong desire to do something. She felt a strong desire to ask Michael to dance, driven by a mixture of nostalgic feelings and the thrill of reliving the past. She saw Richard from a distance, his rigid silhouette at the bar, and felt the guilt gnawing at her insides. She wanted to feel something new. She wanted to feel something different, something new. But now, it felt like everything had fallen apart. She felt torn apart. She knew it. She couldn't take back what she had said, and the weight of her decision began to feel overwhelming. It was as if she was suffocating. Michael, standing nearby, could feel the tension in the air between them. He paused, unsure of how to react. He paused for a moment, but then he walked toward Jessica, his face. He looked serious. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. He asked. "I am really worried." He wasn't sure what was wrong, but he was worried. He felt like something was wrong, though he wasn't sure what. He sensed that something was going on between her and Richard, but he wasn't sure what it was. Jessica, she put on a brave face, trying to hide the inner turmoil she was feeling. "I am fine," he said, looking away. But they both were. They both knew that was a far cry. They both knew it wasn't true. The music played on, and the couples danced, oblivious to the drama unfolding around them. "Jessica, I couldn't concentrate on anything around them. It was as if every decision I'd made in the last few months had led up to this moment, this very moment. She wanted this. She desperately wanted to relive the past, but that would mean losing what she had in the present." Michael, sensing her discomfort, gently suggested they step outside. "It'll do you good to get some fresh air," she agreed. She needed to get away from the overwhelming feeling of being trapped situation outside. The cool Colorado breeze felt so good, it brought her some much-needed relief. They were silent. They sat in silence for several minutes. They looked up at the vast, starry sky. Michael finally spoke. Michael finally broke the silence. The silence hung in the air like a warm blanket. "You look a little upset in there." "What happened?" he asked, his voice soft and gentle. He spoke softly. "Jessica," she sighed, knowing she couldn't hide anything from him anymore. "Richard confided in me. I told you something that changed everything," she replied, still trying to process the impact of her husband's words. "I don't know what," she replied, her voice a mixture of uncertainty and concern. "To do, Michael, I am trapped by something I did. By myself, Michael, was no. I am a bit of a fool, aren't I?" He knew there was more to the story, but he respected Jessica's space. But something was stirring in him too. Ever since they'd gotten back together, he'd been wondering if things could be different, if they could have another chance. But seeing her there, in that moment of vulnerability, he realized how complicated and dangerous it would be to follow that path. But he couldn't help but feel this stirring in his heart, this hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. It was tantalizing, and it made him wonder. Jessica felt it too, his gaze on her, and for the first time she wondered if she had really taken control of her life, or if she was simply being carried away by her emotions. Meanwhile, in the lounge, Richard felt more sober than ever. despite the glasses of whiskey he had consumed. His mind was swirling around Jessica's words, and the man she had mentioned, the one who might be the beginning of the end of his marriage. He was confused, Michael. But it didn't matter. The simple fact, the fact that Jessica had asked to dance with another man, and that she had chosen this moment to reveal her desire, was enough to destroy any trace of trust he had left in her. Richard looked around, his heart heavy with emotion. He saw the people laughing and having a good time, but he felt disconnected from it all. He felt a sense of detachment, as if he was watching himself from a distance. He wanted to leave, to run away, but something kept him there. It might have been the curiosity of what Jessica would do next, or maybe it was his pride, not wanting to leave as a loser. Back outside, Jessica was about to respond to Michael when she noticed movement in the room. She saw several guests. Some of them looked a little worried as they started to leave. She and Michael exchanged glances, sensing that something was about to happen. Suddenly, the door to the hall opened violently, and Richard appeared. His face was tense and his eyes were fixed on Jessica. He stopped in front of them, and for a moment it seemed as if time stood still. Freeze? Michael took a step back, curious to see what would happen next. Richard looked directly into Jessica's eyes, completely ignoring Michael's presence. "I hope it's you," he said, his voice warm and hopeful. "I am so glad," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. His tone was light, teasing, and painful. Jessica was at a loss for words. She felt like she didn't know anything. She said that now would make a difference. She had made her decision, and now she was ready to take the path ahead, even if it was filled with uncertainty. But what she didn't know, what no one there knew, was that the night was far from over. Something hidden was about to come to light, something that would change everyone's lives. It would be a life-changing event, one that would leave an everlasting mark on everyone's life. With one last look. Richard turned and walked away, leaving Jessica and Michael alone in the darkness. Jessica felt a growing fear, as if the air was being sucked out of her. It felt as if it was slowly draining from her lungs. She wanted to run after Richard, to scream, to apologize, but her legs wouldn't move. Michael, understanding the gravity of the moment, tried to offer comfort, but he too was struggling with his own challenges. Control, all that remained was to wait and see what would happen next. And then, there it was. In the tense silence, Jessica noticed something that haunted her. Michael's gaze, full of affection and nostalgia, now carried the shadow of something darker, something she had never noticed before. It was the harbinger of a revelation she was not ready to face. The night still held secrets, and none of them would be easy. She had much to think about. The silence hung in the air, weighing on her like a heavy stone. As night fell over the Cherry Creek neighborhood, Jessica lay still and quiet in the dark. The chill of the Colorado air felt like it was freezing not only her body, but also her soul. Richard's words, they lingered in his mind like a final and unalterable decision. They had been companions for years, sharing joys and sorrows. Now it felt as if they were strangers. And Michael, standing next to her, was like a distorted reflection of the past, bringing back memories that should have stayed buried. "Jessica, I really need to talk to you," Michael said. There was an urgency in his voice that she couldn't ignore. He was closer now, his gaze intense, as if about to reveal something that could no longer be contained. "Jessica," he said, his voice warm and soft. She paused, feeling the ground shift and waver beneath her feet. "I knew this. The moment was urgent, but she was also nervous about what would happen next." She followed him to a corner of the room where the light was soft and dim. Michael turned. His face showed a mixture of concern and determination. "To hear is something. You must know," he began, and Jessica felt it. Her heart began to pound. "It's not me," he said, his voice soft. "It's the same as before. I am not that person, that young man you met years ago, that dreamy boy who believed in happy endings." "Happy endings, Michael? I am so curious what you are trying to tell me. Is there something you want to tell me?" Jessica asked, her voice warm and comforting. She was shaking. She was confused, and fear began to mix, forming a lump in his throat. I never stopped. I thought about you, he admitted, and what should have sounded romantic sounded more like a deep confession all these years. I've wondered what it would be like if our lives had taken a different path. When I met you, I saw a chance to right a past wrong and maybe save what we had left behind. But things have changed. Things have changed. I've changed too. Jessica took a step back, the weight of his words falling over her like a blanket of fear. Michael, we're so different now. We're all adults now. That was a long time ago. We can't just do this. Go back. I understand, he went on, his voice warm and understanding. He said it in a dark tone, but I'm not just. I'm talking about both of us. To hear is more to it than that. I have something to tell you, and I hope you'll listen. Jessica. I felt her stomach turn. What do you mean? Richard isn't the one. The only one with secrets, Jessica. Michael confessed, his voice deep and thick with emotion. And the secret, I've kept it all these years, all about you. It was as if Jessica's breath escaped her, and for a fleeting moment, the world around her seemed to stop spinning. Michael, my love, what have you done? It was her voice. It was barely a whisper, as if she was trying to process everything that had happened. Michael paused, his eyes on the floor, unable to meet Jessica's gaze. Eyes, I never told you what happened after you got married. It absolutely devastated me, and I felt so betrayed by you, and it felt like a punch in the gut, like something out of a movie, you know. Like fate had a funny way of playing tricks on us. I wish things were different. I was young and things were different then. I was so impulsive. I did things. I made mistakes. One of those mistakes was keeping in touch with you after you were already with someone else. Jessica started. I was trying to put the pieces together, but I wasn't there yet. I understand, but it was true. That was a long time ago, Michael. Why does it matter now? Because I never did. He looked up and finally admitted. I stopped wanting you. To her. I never stop, he added, a gentle smile spreading across his face, thinking about the two of us. I can't stop thinking about us, he added, a gentle smile spreading across his face. When we met, I saw a chance to start over, and I couldn't let it go, but I knew I had to get Richard out of the way. Out of the way. From Michael, my words were like a gentle rain falling on the ground, clearing a path for us to move forward. One punch from Jessica. She was speechless, her emotions mixing in an overwhelming way. A path. Get Richard out of here, she said, her voice warm and reassuring. Out of the way. What have you done, Michael? I knew it. I am sorry, but if I revealed our past, if I told him what really happened between us, he would. I'm sorry, but I can't forgive you. He would leave you, and then I would finally have a chance to be with you. Michael confessed, and it was clear that he felt guilty in your voice. But I realized, it was too late to realize that it wasn't the same. That time had changed everything, including us, Jessica. She felt tears streaming down her face. You cried them out. It was all out of revenge. Or was it jealousy? Did you destroy my marriage for something that happened years ago? I just wanted to, Michael whispered, his voice breaking. What I thought was mine. You destroyed everything, Michael, she replied, her voice shaking with emotion. Shock turned to anger. Anger. You tricked him. You even used our meetings to create situations that made Richard suspicious. All to try to restore something that could never be restored again. Michael stayed. Michael was silent, and it was clear that he felt shame. His expression spoke volumes. Jessica, she knew he was sincere, but that didn't lessen the pain of his revelations. She felt used. She felt betrayed in ways she had never imagined. What was possible? What should have been? A reunion with a nostalgic past, a reconnection with an old friend, turned into an emotional trap, carefully planned by someone she thought she knew. The truth, in its rawest form, left her heartbroken. Michael, whom she had always admired as a kind of lost love, turned out to be a man fixated on an idea that no longer existed. Their reunion. It wasn't just a coincidence, but part of a plan to destroy what she and Richard had worked so hard to build. Jessica. She felt the anger bubble up inside her, growing uncontrollably. They had played with our emotions. Lives, Michael. They used our lives, as if our feelings were pawns in some cruel game being played to satisfy their twisted desires. It was so self-centered. His words cut through the air, filled with pain and disappointment. Michael had. There was nothing left to say. The reality, his actions had hit him hard, and he knew that whatever the outcome of tonight, he had already lost Jessica. She had loved and idealized him for so long, and now she saw him for what he really was, a broken man driven by selfish and destructive desires. The mask had fallen, and all that was left was the truth, the bitter truth. It was me. Wrong, he whispered to himself, but more to himself than to her, more to himself than to her. I thought I could. I thought I could change things, change us, start over. But I did. But I only made things worse. Jessica didn't. It's okay to react. She didn't react right away. She looked so disappointed. And it was clear that the revelations were more than she could handle. But she couldn't. She couldn't stay there, thinking about the past. The past. She knew that he had to do something. He had to make a decision that would determine the rest of his life. Then the lounge door opened again, and Richard appeared on the curb, his eyes fixed on her. He had returned, but not out of weakness or uncertainty. He had to. He had to face Jessica one last time. The shock of seeing them together, the scene of complicity he had feared so much, was now a reality. But to his astonishment, he did not find the image of an ecstatic couple. Instead, there was pain, anger, and a sense of unease clouded their faces. Richard began to speak to Jessica, but was interrupted by a silent gesture from him. He wasn't there to hear. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to apologize. Answer, I've heard enough, Richard said, his voice firm, but filled with deep sadness. I should have. I wish I had seen it sooner. But I was blind. I thought you were still the same woman I fell in love with. In love with Jessica. I felt that her words weighed more than anything Michael could have said. She could have said she wasn't the same person. She wasn't the same anymore. She was different now. She knew it, Richard, but she didn't know how to move on. Do you have anything to help her? Do you have anything to say, Jessica? Richard asked gently. His eyes met hers, searching for comfort in hers. Can you at least be honest now? Jessica asked. She felt the pressure of the situation, but she knew the only thing she could do was face the truth. It was me. Richard, I know you are just trying to be helpful, but I need to be honest with you. I let myself. I got carried away with feelings that should have stayed in the past. Michael shouldn't be here. I wish he wasn't here. He shouldn't be in our lives. But I let him in. I made a mistake, but I never meant for it to happen. I am sorry I hurt you, but it doesn't change what happened, Richard replied, his tone soft and kind. You made me, and I am grateful. I've questioned everything, and now I am not sure what's real, Jessica said, her voice soft and warm. She realized that Richard was still hurt, despite everything, but there was still something about him that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be fixed. She approached him. She felt tears in her eyes. I hurt you, and I know it may be too late to ask for forgiveness. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me, but I still love you. Richard looked at her, heartbroken. For a long moment his expression softened, but the weariness and disappointment were still there. Love shouldn't be this hard, Jessica. Love shouldn't destroy. Michael, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. He intervened. It's my fault. He apologized and said, I am sorry. It wasn't Richard's fault. It was you. I am the one who caused this. I am the one who brought chaos into your life. I am the one who made things difficult for you. I've said things I didn't mean, and now I am facing the consequences. I am the one who caused all the chaos, and I am the one who has to deal with the consequences. If anyone should be held responsible, it should be me. If anyone should be held accountable, it's me. Richard looked at Michael. Michael? And for a moment, it looked like he was going to. He looked like he was going to explode. But then he did. He let out a long, heavy sigh. A sigh, what you had done. It was truly heartbreaking, and it's hard to find the words to forgive, but it doesn't change the fact that you are still a good person. Your betrayal. You both made mistakes. Mistakes happen. I am sorry, but I just don't have the energy for this right now. Jessica felt her heart sink. I knew, Richard, I was right. The wounds were there. They were too deep. I knew the damage that had been done couldn't be undone with words of repentance. But you know what? She's a strong person and she's not going to give up so easily. Richard, please give me a chance to make things right. Right. Richard, understanding her plight, gave her a chance. He sat in silence for a long time, lost in thought, as if wrestling with his own inner conflict. After a long moment, he finally looked up at her, and Jessica saw that the man she loved was there, but he looked deeply hurt. I don't know, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. If I can trust you again, he said, his voice tinged with sadness. The silence hung in the air like a heavy weight. The tension hung thick in the air. It felt so heavy and crushing, the decision. Everyone knew that whatever path they chose from now on wouldn't be easy. Simple, but there was one thing. It all started with a simple request for a dance, but as the night wore on, it became clear that things were about to take a turn for the worse. Jessica. She waited for Richard's answer, feeling the weight of her decision like an impossible burden. All she could do was wait. Now she had to wait for the verdict of the man she had betrayed but still loved. The cold Colorado wind blew past them, promising a cold morning far away. The cold of Colorado, the silence between them, felt like a heavy weight on her heart. Richard, Jessica, and Michael were in a difficult situation, each facing their own challenges. It felt like they were each fighting their own personal demons. It was a time of revelation. The echoes of that night still lingered, leaving a void in a place where certainties once abounded. There were none. They tried to go back, but it wasn't easy. Richard was left to face the consequences of his actions. Richard, still struggling with his emotions, finally broke the silence. I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice cracking with emotional exhaustion. For years I thought our marriage was solid, that we were different. But now I see that we were just another couple. Cast adrift, Jessica felt. His words, a mixture of guilt and despair, hit her hard. She had always known that her actions would have consequences, but to see the man she loved so broken was more than she could bear. It was more than she could bear. She knew it. She had been wrong. She knew that she had allowed the past to invade the present in a way that could not be undone. She felt completely and utterly broken. But now, seeing Richard hurt, she was faced with a dilemma she hadn't thought about before. Face Richard, I know I can't change what happened, Jessica began, her voice trembling with emotion but determined. But what we can do is look to the future. Now is what we do from here. From here, we have the power to choose. We can let tonight define everything, or we can try to rebuild, even if it's in a different way. Michael watched them, realizing that his role there was over. He had been the spark that ignited everything, but now he saw that he could not control the fire that was spreading. Control. He took a step back, aware that his presence there was only making things more difficult. I think I should go, he said, almost in a whisper, trying to leave the scene with what little dignity he had left. Richard looked at Michael, and for a moment it looked like he was going to explode with rage. But then something shifted inside him. He nodded without saying a word. Michael turned. He began to walk away. His figure slowly faded into the night like a ghost from a forgotten past, like something from the past. Jessica. She felt a brief sense of relief, but she understood that the real challenge was just beginning. She and Richard would have to face what was left of their lives without Michael's presence. Marriage, I don't know if I can forget it, Richard continued with a gentleness that touched her heart. His attention now fully focused on Jessica. Jessica, all of us. Everything we built, everything we believed in, destroyed in a single night. How can we just go on? Jessica knew there was no easy answer to that question. She could see the gap between them growing, a gap caused by years of not talking, hidden anger, and finally the discovery of a betrayal that revealed what they had both been hiding from each other. "I don't know," she said, her voice reflecting her uncertainty. "If we can make it." She felt the hot, bitter words on the tip of her tongue. "But maybe we can. That's what we have to do. We have to make a decision. If it's worth it, we have to choose between trying to make it work or accepting that it's over." The moral. The dilemma they faced was really hard, Jessica. She knew there was a price to pay, but she wasn't sure she was willing to pay it. Richard was also in a tough spot. He wanted to get even, but he still loved her. He couldn't decide whether to save her or punish her. "Do you still love me?" Richard asked. The question, uttered in a moment of desperation, carried more weight than a plea. Jessica, looking deep into his eyes, searching for a spark of the man she knew, she answers with painful honesty. "Yes, I still do," she replies, her voice trembling slightly. "I love you, but I know that, but it may not be enough." Richard looked away, his face a picture of vulnerability. He fought back tears, trying not to get emotional. "Love is not enough," he whispered, almost to himself. "We have a choice now. We can try again, or we can choose to let go. But if I try, Jessica, if I really try, will you promise me you won't make this mistake again?" Jessica felt. She felt the weight of his request, that she promise him her undivided attention, because she knew that promising was one thing, but fulfilling it with the weight of what had already happened between them would be quite another. Still, there was no other choice. "I promise," she said, that with more conviction than she had expected. "I know I have," she said, her voice warm with sincerity. "I know I've let you down, and I am not sure that's going to change any time soon, but I am willing to do whatever it takes to save what we still have." Richard was. She paused, thinking hard, letting the promise sink in. What they did, what came next, would determine the future. For better or worse, they were on it. A choice they made would take them into a new world, one that might feel a little unexpected or even a little scary, but it was their journey, and they were the ones responsible for how it turned out or not, and so it was. They stood there side by side, but separated by an abyss that might never be completely filled. The night was over, but it wasn't over yet. What happened next would define their marriage and who they would become, the decision. It hung in the air like a question, waiting to be answered. A rope stretched across the chasm that separated them, Jessica and Richard. For days, they both tried not to look at each other, both afraid of what they might see in each other's eyes, the face. But there was one truth they couldn't ignore. There was a growing weight in the silence, a tension that demanded. They needed resolution. They knew they couldn't. They couldn't go on like this. They knew they couldn't go on forever. The morning after, Richard decided to take the initiative. He woke up. Before the sun was up, the house fell into an uneasy silence. It was quiet. He sat at the kitchen table and thought. With a warm cup of coffee in his hands, he thought about the life he shared with Jessica. Memories of the years of marriage mixed with the recent pain to create a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He felt like he needed something. He needed clarity, something that could illuminate the path ahead, whether it was reconciliation or goodbye. When Jessica finally came down the stairs, her eyes met Richard's with a mixture of hope and fear. She was unsure of what was to come. She knew she couldn't keep running from what needed to be done. She knew it was time to face the challenges ahead. "We must speak, Richard." His voice was soft but firm. "Jessica." She nodded her head in agreement, and they sat facing each other, the tension between them almost palpable. "It was me thinking," Richard began, choosing his words carefully. "We can't erase what happened. We can't pretend that nothing has changed because everything has changed. But maybe," he added hopefully, "we can find a way forward. Instead of trying to rebuild something that's broken, let's ask ourselves where we really want to go. Let's move forward together, Jessica. I understand the weight. I knew those words. I knew that complete reconciliation was an illusion, but the idea of final separation was still. It was frightening. I am still here, Richard, and I love you. But if that's not enough, I understand. If that's not enough, then maybe it's best if we put it all behind us past. Richard looked at her. He saw a mixture of sadness and understanding in her eyes. Love is not enough, Jessica, he said softly, but here is still something we can do. We can decide if we want to keep trying or if we need to separate to find something we don't know yet. We have to do that. These words, they may be painful, but they bring unexpected clarity. They were about them, the love they shared. Their love was real, but the scars left by their choices made it impossible for them to go back to the way things were. They were both changed by their experiences, and they couldn't go back to the way things were. They realized sometimes the hardest choice is the most necessary. With a deep sense of understanding, they realized that sometimes the choice that feels the hardest is the one that's really best for you. Jessica looked at Richard with tears in her eyes. I think we do. I think we already know the answer, she said, her voice shaking but determined. I want to believe that we can get through this, but I think it's best for both of us to go our separate ways. Separate ways, Richard nodded. Understanding his sadness was obvious in his face. I didn't want it to be like this, if only things were different, he whispered. But maybe this is the way it has to be. We have to find peace. The silence, what followed was deep and meaningful, and it made them feel so much better. They had come to the end of their journey together. And although the pain was intense, there was also a mutual acceptance that it was the right time to say goodbye. There would be none. There would be no shouting, no accusations, no recriminations, just that. They understood that in spite of everything, they both deserved another chance to start over, even if it wasn't with each other. Over the next few weeks, they worked through their feelings and made a new plan for their lives. The separation process was hard, but it was also a journey of unexpected growth and understanding. It was a peaceful process. They sold the house, and each moved on with their lives. They sold the house, divided the assets, and moved on with their lives. Jessica, she returned to Denver, ready to start a new chapter without the weight of the past. One life. Richard, on the other hand, decided to move to a new city in search of a place where he could find new meaning in life. As for Michael, the man who had once upset the balance of their destinies was now gone from both of their lives. Guilt consumed him. He left without a trace, carrying the burden of his mistakes. He knew he could never atone for what he had done. He knew he could never undo the wrongs he had caused, but he hoped that time would give him a chance to redeem himself away from everyone he had hurt. Months later, on a sunny afternoon, Jessica found an envelope addressed to her with no return address. When she opened it, there was a letter inside. It was from Michael. In it, he expressed his regret, admitted all his guilt, and wished that she and Richard could be happy even if they were separated. If separated, the content of the letter was very heartfelt. While it didn't bring him much relief, it did bring a sense of closure to a difficult chapter. Jessica. She felt a sense of release as she burned the letter and scattered the ashes to the wind, leaving the past behind. The wind carried the message, the hope of a new beginning, as did the flames. As she read Michael's words, she felt a sense of freedom and readiness to move on with her life past. And so they moved on, each carrying their own scars, but also the hope that despite the dark past, the future still held something good, because sometimes the end of one journey is just the beginning of another, and that's something to celebrate.